On behalf of the Certificate of Sephardic Ancestry, Jewish Unity Through Diversity, Jamie Milgram, and Reconnectar, we are very proud to welcome back Professor Ronnie Perelis of Yeshiva University. He will, I will read the full description. It's a long description of his title. He is the Chief Rabbi Dr. Isaac Abraham and Jelena Alcalay Associate Professor of Sephardic Studies at Yeshiva University and the Director of the Rabbi Arthur Schneier Program for International Affairs. For our purposes, he is a scholar in Sephardic history, particularly in the New World, particularly in the Iberian Peninsula, and that's really what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to continue. He is also working on an English translation and historical study of the rediscovered manuscripts of Luis de Carvajal, a 16th century Mexican crypto-Jewish thinker, and I'm sure his name may come up today. I don't know. I haven't pre-heard the talk, so we will hear it together. A few technical details. Your cameras and microphones are off. Please do put your comments or questions into Q&A and into the chat. If needed, I will interrupt. Otherwise, I will ask the questions at the end. I want to do a few little plugs. Thank you for those who support our programs by donating. That's the way that we can offer these programs for free. So if you would continue, we would appreciate that. We have next week with Dr. Roger Martinez, where we're going to be talking about recreating the world, basically. So I'll let you come back to that. Please do check it out on our website. You will get the link in the follow-up email. And watch out for our raffle that's coming up soon. That'll be interesting too. I will have more details as time goes on. And you didn't come to hear me, so I will give the floor over to Professor Perelis. Thank you again for joining us. And again, those of you who were not here last week, please do not worry. You will be able to follow. So thank you for joining us.
Sure. Hello, everybody. Thank you, Drora. It's wonderful working with you always. We've been doing it now for a bunch of years, and I'm really excited by this new project you're developing, and I think it's really important. There's clearly a hunger out there for people to understand the diversity and the richness and the complexity of Jewish history and the Jewish experience, and it's really, I'm so happy to be able to share my little bit of knowledge and world with this, and it's just great. Also, it's wonderful to see people taking time out of their day. It's not easy, and to enrich yourself. So I hope that the time is spent well. Last week, people asked for some book recommendations, and I wanted to give you that. Just let me know if you see this. You can see? Yeah, if I do this, okay. Yeah, you see it, right? Okay, so I just took down a few books from my shelves. We're in my study, my home study here in Teaneck, New Jersey. This is where some of the magic happens. And I was thinking of just a sampling. We are living really honestly in a golden age of Jewish books. There's so much great stuff, especially about aspects of Jewish history that are often neglected or forgotten or not really thought of by mainstream Jewish organizations and certainly mainstream society and culture. And thank God we have so much out there. So I'm going to just give you some more general and some more specific, and I'm going to leave people out. I'm sorry. I apologize. There's a lot here. Okay. First of all, if you want to get a big overview of the early modern period. Now, some of you might say, I never heard of that, but you've heard of Renaissance, you've heard of Baroque. So historians, we like to rethink things and think about the end of the Middle Ages, but before modernity really begins, right? Before the French Revolution, let's say in Europe or other places. And for Jews, the early modern period, so think about post-expulsion, right? After 1492, what does the world look like until we get up to, depends on where you want to start it, but the beginnings of emancipation, the Haskalah, the French Revolution, those things. So that 200 or so or 300 year period, which is so rich, there's so much going on. And so David Ruderman, who's someone who really shaped this field of early modern history in general and Jewish history in particular. He was a professor at Yale and then at Penn for many years, and a great scholar. This is a book he wrote when he retired. And so it's really a great summation of a lot of material, synthesized beautifully, very accessible.
I'm going to interrupt for 1 minute just
Yeah.
to tell you that I'm going to stop your sharing so that we can see you in bigger.
Perfect. Okay, good. You got it. So this is Early Modern Jewry, A New Cultural History by David Ruderman. Highly recommended. If you're interested in questions of Jews and science in the 17th century, David Ruderman is a great place to go. That's one of the early things he worked on Jews in Italy and things like that. Fascinating and very helpful. This book is very helpful. All right, this is a collection of sources put together by two great scholars, Adriana Brodsky at Maryland and Laura Arnold Liebman. Adriana is a professor of modern Argentina, and Laura is a professor of 17th, 18th century American Jewry, American including the Caribbean, a much wider view. That's a really important. Remember, the Americas. Only people in the United States call the United States America, right? Everyone else, it's North America, it's United States. So think more broadly. This is a great resource of sources put out by NYU. It's soft cover, not so expensive, and great. I mentioned this book last week, Dying in the Law of Moses by Miriam Bodian. I recommend any book Miriam Bodian writes. She's a great historian, and great historian of the Jews of Amsterdam in particular. This book is about the Inquisition and people brought before the Inquisition who wanted to make a point, not just people who wanted to get out alive, but people who wanted to challenge the inquisitors. They would argue with them. They wanted to prove to them the truth of Judaism. Very interesting stuff. And Miriam is just one of the great historians out there. So there's that. A few more. Jews in the Caribbean, edited by Jane Gerber. This is a collection of great essays about Jews in the Caribbean. We're going to talk about them today. So this is a great place to look. Yeah. So take a look. And like I said, it goes from the colonial period up till today. There's even modern things about Jews in different parts of the modern Caribbean. Really wonderful book. This was a path-breaking book. It was based on a very important seminar that happened at Johns Hopkins many years ago, Atlantic Diasporas. It's a collection of essays. And by the way, all the books that I'm showing you are not expensive. None of them are from the very, very exclusive publishing houses. So they're affordable. You can probably find them maybe even in a library, public library if you don't have access to a university one. This one is a collection of essays all about what we've been talking about last week and this week, which is the back and forth between Jews who live in open Jewish communities in the Atlantic world, whether that's in Jamaica or Curacao or London or Amsterdam, and those who live as conversos in places like Seville or in Havana or Mexico or Lima, right? That back and forth. This is more scholarly than the other books I just showed you, but really excellent stuff. Okay. Also, I mentioned last week Martin Cohen's book on Luis de Carvajal. It's a great book, even though it's quite old. It's still an excellent book and also very accessible and not expensive. This book, Living in Silverado. Okay, this is a book by my dear departed friend, David Gitlitz. Many of you probably know the name. He was a prolific writer, scholar. He was a man of many, many gifts and very generous person, really virtually very generous. And this is a book that he wrote in his retirement, living in Oaxaca. He had a house in Oaxaca that he moved to with his wife in Mexico. And this is about, at first it sounds very niche, and it is, but Gitlitz's gift was to be able to take things that are very niche and make them very, very broad, and very relatable. This is about silver mining in colonial Mexico. It happens to be that many of the people that were involved have connections to the Inquisition, connections to a lot of the Jewish networks that we're going to talk about today a little bit, and you'll learn a lot about silver mining, which is, you'd think it's boring, but is actually fascinating. But also a lot about the religiosity and social connections of these families. It's fascinating stuff. And it's, sadly, he passed away a little bit after this book came out. And it's a big loss to have him. But there are many, many more. I'm happy to if you send me an email, I can send you other ideas for books. But, go and learn. Okay, so let me get to our PowerPoint. And here we go. Okay. Give me a second. Okay. So some of you weren't here last week, and that's fine. We're going to skip some of the things, but you will be able to follow. This is self-standing to some extent, to a great extent. So I'm sorry for the whiplash here. Just give me a second. We're going to get to our place. It's just a really brief recap. This is the Alhambra Palace. This is the last place where political Islam had a foothold in Spain after hundreds of years of back and forth tension between the Christians and Muslims in Spain. The Catholic monarchs, Ferdinand and Isabella, triumphantly enter this palace, and it's from this palace that they decide on many important decisions. One of them was the expulsion of the Jews of Spain, a millennial people who've been living in Spain for 1,000 years. It was a very weighty decision, and they made it there in the shadow of their triumphant religious conquest. They decided to also expel the Jews, but they also, and the Jews, the Sephardim become Sephardim when they go into exile. They go to North Africa, they go to Italy, they go to the Ottoman Empire, Middle East, Israel, Egypt, Syria. And then the rest stay, right? The rest stay in Spain, and they stay as converted Catholics. They are now conversos. They are no longer Jews officially. They need to live like Catholics, and they live under the watchful eye of the Inquisition. But something else happens in 1492. The Catholic monarchs also make a contract with an eccentric navigator known as Christopher Columbus. And he transforms our notion of the world from a world where we have 3 continents that are very well defined, even though this map is not a great example of that definition, but at least the sense that there was a place called Europe, there was a place called Africa, and a place called Asia. And even though it was not very well known to people in Europe, this was the world, and these were the people that we knew of. And he expands that. At first, people don't really understand the extent to his discovery. It takes a while, and this transforms the world. And this happens also in 1492, as we all know. He sailed the ocean blue. And the 2 events are twinned in Columbus's mind as well. He tries to tell the king and queen, listen, guys, you did this amazing thing. You conquered the Muslims, and then you kicked out the Jews. And now I'm going on this amazing journey. And so you should be very proud of yourselves. You have a trifecta here. And there are other ways that Columbus invokes Jewish ideas with the journey. He invokes a lot of Edenic language when he meets the Indians, or the people he calls Indians, the Taino and the Carib people. He invokes ideas about going back and taking the gold that he finds, which he didn't really find any, but to find the gold and then use it for a crusade to take back the Holy Land for the church, which is not very Jewish, but certainly deals with ideas of Jerusalem and Israel and things like that. But what the Americans did do sorry, I want to go back to this map for a minute. What the Americas did offer was, for many people in the old world, new opportunities. And a subset of those people that we talked about last week were conversos, were people who convert to Catholicism in Spain under different layers of duress, who were looking for new opportunities. Some were looking for opportunities to live Jewish lives. Most of those people made their way to Morocco and Italy and Ottoman Empire, places like that. But within the world of the conversos, there were people who were in the middle and mixed up and who believed in, they were Christians ostensibly, but they had an attachment to their ancestral Judaism. And some of those people wanted a place where they could be unmolested, where they could be not watched, and they could practice Judaism. And some of them found that in the Americas. However, as the timeline here shows, the Inquisition also came to the Americas. The Inquisition, just to give you a sense of the timeline, by 1525, Mexico was conquered. 50 years later, there's an Inquisition working in Mexico City, one in Lima, and by the 1630s, there's one in Cartagena de Indias in Colombia. So we're dealing with a world where the Catholic Church moves over, where missionary activity is very important with the Indians, where there's a desire to surveil and keep the local Spanish colonizers Christian, because a lot of them were going off the rails a little bit. There was a lot of far away from home. Many of them were not acting in the most Christian way. And so the Inquisition was there to keep a watchful eye on all of those people. And they noticed something early on, that there were many people of converso origin arriving in the Americas. And they were coming for economic opportunities. And again, a subset of those people were coming for the chance to, in the anonymity of this new place, a place where you could change your name, where people don't remember your background, where they don't remember that your grandfather was arrested for being a Jew, or that your aunt was burnt at the stake for being, for keeping Shabbat. You could go and you can change your name, and you could tell a story about yourself that's not the old story. You can move to a town where no one knows you. And so many people did that. And we have examples of those. And then there are other examples of full networks of conversos who, for, again, a combination of family reasons, economic reasons, and sometimes religious reasons, come to the Americas looking for those opportunities. And one of the greatest examples of that group is the Carvajal family. Here you see a classic history book of the Carvajal family by Alfonso Toro from Mexico, written, published originally in the 1930s. This is a repeat copy. Here's a collection of writings from Seymour Liebman, professor at University of Miami in the 70s. This is my book that has 2 chapters dedicated to Carvajal. Now, you see Carvajal is part of this big family, and he has an uncle. The uncle is also Luis de Carvajal. People's names switched around a lot. So Luis de Carvajal, the one that's famous, is the younger, El Mozo in Spanish, but he had an uncle, and the uncle had no children. And so young Luis, who was actually Luis Rodriguez, changes his name to his uncle's name and becomes his uncle's right-hand man, because his uncle was a very important person. His uncle gained the title of governor of Nuevo León, which is the northeastern part of Mexico, modern Mexico. The city of Monterrey, a very important industrial town, that is in there, and that's where this statue is of Luis de Carvajal de la Cueva. And this uncle gained the title of governor of this territory. It's a new territory. There were nomadic indigenous peoples known as the Chichimecos, who were rather violent, not very happy to have these colonizers in their territory. He had to deal with them. he had the opportunity to develop silver mines in this region as well. And so there was a lot of work to do. And he brought with him about 200 members, mostly of his family, but also relatives of relatives, friends of friends, over to the New World. Almost all of them were conversos. Of that group, how many of them were interested and committed to keeping Judaism? We don't know. We know that some of them were very interested and others couldn't care less. And some, like the uncle, the governor, were devout, passionate Catholics who would have been very upset to know that their relatives were practicing Judaism. And that was exactly the case. So we have a mixed family living here in Nuevo Reino de León, all right, on this very vast territory. Most of them, after a while, don't like living here because it's wild, it's rough, the weather's not good, it's swampy or desert, and they move to Mexico City, where there are a lot of economic opportunities and life is a lot nicer. And we're not going to spend a lot of time in Carvajal. We can do that another time. And I just want to show you some things from his life. So on one level, he has this uncle who's a devout Catholic, who's a man of the crown. He works for the government. He's a warrior. And then the rest of the family are merchants connected to other converso merchants. And within that group, you have a subset of people who are dedicated to maintaining Judaism in secret, who gather together for the great day, the day of pardons, Yom Kippurim, right? For they fast on Yom Kippur. They fast 3 days for Purim, 3 days leading up to the holiday of Purim, but they don't do Purim. They read the Bible and they see that Esther fasted for 3 days, and that's what they do. They keep the Sabbath in their own way. And some of them, like Luis de Carvajal the Younger, are bookish, and they want a Judaism, a secret Judaism, a crypto Judaism that is deeply rooted in words, in sacred text. And he gets his hands on a Bible, and he's able to then use that Catholic Bible, take the Jewish parts, and then use that as inspiration for his own religious thinking. He writes with his beautiful penmanship. You can see it here. Look how beautiful his handwriting is. He writes a spiritual diary, talking about his discovery of Judaism, his exploits in Mexico, his ups, downs, his imprisonments, his tortures, all the things of his life. He also writes some fascinating original religious poetry, prayers, all sorts of things in this book. When he's arrested in 1595, the inquisitors find him and they find this book and they keep it as evidence. It's maintained evidence in his trial record until 1932, when a mysterious visitor to the archives in Mexico City stole it, and it only resurfaced in 2016. That's been talked about in the New York Times and other places. I'm lucky enough to be part of a group that is editing and translating this work, and so keep posted. We'll have things coming out, and if you want to learn more about it, you can look my name on tablet. I wrote one piece for tablet, and it's about this. You can find it, and I can send you the link to go deeper, because I want to talk about a few other things. But this book is just fascinating, and it's thanks to this amazing, accident and not only accident, also moral fiber. I'll just tell you the story very quickly. Leonard Milberg is a collector of Judaica and early Americana, and Swan Gallery approached him with this book, and he smelled something a little funny, and he looked into it, and when he realized that it was this stolen book that's been talked about for 7 decades, he called the FBI and told them about it. And before giving it over to the Mexican authorities, he asked them to be able to digitize it. And that's what he did. And it's available for anyone who wants on the Princeton University website. Just go, put in Luis de Carvajal, you will find it, and you could look at it yourself. It's a beautiful digitization. So he's an example of an outstanding example of someone who not only kept Judaism, but almost created his own personal Jewish life and Jewish thought. And he shared it with his small group of fellow conversos who were interested in this. And I'll just give you one other little example from his life. We talked about this individual, this icon. This is St. James, the Moor Slayer, Santiago Matamoros, the symbol of the Christian reconquest against the Muslims. As you see, Muslim soldiers trampled on the floor. This would be found in medieval churches in Spain, very common. But as the Spanish conquer the Americas, he is transformed into St. James, the Indian killer. And you see Indian soldiers being trampled down underneath his horse. So the transference of the religious and political struggles that you see in Spain get transferred to the New World rather forcefully. But also they happen spiritually. This is a fascinating place called the monastery of St. James, Santiago, again. But in this case, there's no murdering happening. It's a place of spiritual conquest. St. James of Tlatelolco, which is a town, it used to be a separate town near Mexico City of Tenochtitlan, and today it's just a suburb. And it is here that Luis was placed for his penance. He was placed to teach Indian elites, the children of Indian elites, teach them Latin. And while he was there, he created that book, mostly during his time here, in the monastery, because here he had access to many books, many Christian books that he was able to transform into Jewish books. Okay, and I'll just leave you with this. This is the last thing. And this kind of is a good bridge, because Carvajal, most of his knowledge came from his family, like oral traditions. It came from reading the Jewish parts of the Catholic Bible, so the Old Testament, the Apocrypha, books of Maccabees, things like that, in Latin, because he knew Latin, and other Christian books that had Jewish content that he was able to take out. And then the last piece, and this is really important, and as I do more research and talk to fellow scholars, I see that this is more and more important. There were Jews, Spanish Jews, who went to exile to Italy and Turkey and other places, who for personal reasons came back to the Spanish world. They came back to the lands of captivity. Generally was financial. They weren't making it in Italy. They wanted to, so they go to Spain, they go to the Americas, and when they go to places, they look for landsmen, to use a old Ladino term. They look for fellow conversos. Sometimes they're related to them. Sometimes they know someone who knows someone who knows someone. And in the case of Carvajal, there were several Italian Jews. So Sephardic Jews who went to exile to Italy, 80 years later, wasn't going well for them. They get on a boat and they go back to the world they know. They go back to Spain or Portugal or Mexico or Lima or somewhere like that. And when they come to Mexico City and they meet other conversos and they can confide in them that they're Jewish, they're able to give those conversos Jewish knowledge that they would never have. It's like, think of a small American town, and one kid goes to yeshiva in Israel and he comes back with a lot of knowledge. He could read from the Torah. He could teach kids bar mitzvah. He could give a class on Saturday afternoon, whatever it is. That kid who spent 1 year in Israel comes back with a lot more knowledge than most people in his town, and he can change the whole environment. This is what happens with these Italian Jews. They come in, they know by heart, they know prayers in Hebrew, and they can translate them into Spanish. They know about all sorts of laws, halachot, different Jewish practices. Oh, no, you don't do it like this, you do it like this. Oh, you want to do it like that? Oh, well, try this way. So these Italian Jews come, they're amazing storehouses of knowledge. They come to Mexico, spend time there, and sometimes they translate whole passages of prayers. In this case, look what we have here. It's a little hard to read. Fiesta de Hanukkah, Fiesta de Esther, Pesach, Shabuot, Tammuz, Tishna B'Av, Rosh Hashanah, Gedalia, Kippur. And here you have the day week, the date, and the month. So January, February, March, all right, it keeps on going. Over here, so we have all these holidays. Hanukkah, Esther meaning the fast of Esther, Pesach, Shabuot, others, and then rabbinic holidays like the fast of the 17th of Tammuz or Tisha B'Av, which is not in the Torah. Gedalia, another fast, which is not in the Torah. Pretty fascinating, no? And it does it for 2 years. You can go bound, you can see it. And then he has another thing which is just amazing. The months in Hebrew, Tishrei, Cheshvan, it goes on. So this is the way that they were able to do it. So the two worlds, the worlds of lands of captivity and lands of liberty, right? The world of the conversos who had to live as Catholics under the Inquisition, and the world of the Jews who were free to live as open Jews in Sephardic communities all over the world, was often more porous than we realize. There was back and forth. People went, people came back. Luis had two brothers who made it to Salonika in his Jewish community in Greece, and made it to freedom there. Other people go back and forth. So it's very complicated and very rich and very interesting. Okay. So, like I said before, these were the areas where most Sephardic Jews went to live as open Sephardic Jews. And this is a beautiful detail that comes from the Ferrara Bible, which is a product of that Sephardic diaspora. This was printed in this is a copy of the Ferrara Bible printed in Amsterdam, but the original one was printed in the first generation after the expulsion by Spanish-speaking Jews in Italy. It's translated into a beautiful Old Spanish, and very important. And here we see this beautiful image of, first of all, on eagle's wings, but also the reuniting of Joseph and his father in Egypt. It's a very beautiful, powerful detail. But you see the rest of it here. Biblia en lengua española, Bible in the Spanish language, translated word for word from the Hebrew truth by very excellent educated people. And it was proofed by the Inquisition, so don't worry, you won't get in trouble. And it's done, and also the Duke of Ferrara approves, and it's done in Ferrara originally, and then it's retranslated in Amsterdam. And if we just go back to this map for a minute, Amsterdam is going to be part of the last chapter of what we're talking about today, which is the Jews in Spain and Portugal, mostly in Portugal, started to move out of the peninsula looking for economic opportunities. They moved to places like the south of France, where you have to be Catholic, but there's no Inquisition. And so they could live in an open secret. They could, among themselves, practice Judaism as long as they go to church and as long as they don't make a problem. Some of them do the same thing in Antwerp, a very important port controlled by the Spanish, but no Inquisition there. When Amsterdam and the Dutch territories throw out the Catholic Spanish, there's a new opportunity, and Jews move there. Conversos move from Antwerp to Amsterdam and slowly come out openly as Jews. Um, and they go to Amsterdam not because Amsterdam is a hub of international trade, and it's a place that allows them to practice their religion without interference, and so and they have an advantage. The Dutch often are at war with the Spanish or the Portuguese. These people have connections back in Spain and Portugal, and so they're able to be the middlemen between the Dutch, and then later they become the middlemen for the English, again with the Spanish and the Portuguese. But something else happens. The Dutch and then later the English have colonies in the Caribbean, and of course the English have colonies in North America, and they offer religious freedom to Jews in those places. And we start to see first in Dutch Brazil for about 30 years until it's retaken by the Portuguese, and then in Suriname, in Curacao, in Jamaica, and then later in the American northern colonies, Jewish settlement throughout. And this is coming from this community, the Amsterdam community. This is the symbol of the Amsterdam community. It's a phoenix rising from the ashes, because these are all people who lived like conversos, like Catholics in Amsterdam, in Portugal and Spain for over 100 years before they made it to the freedom of Holland. Here's their synagogue. There's an example of the sort of tombstones they would create in Portuguese, regardless of the fact that they're living in Amsterdam. And you see the sort of books that they created because the community was constantly, new people were arriving after hundreds of living like Catholics wanting to be Jewish. And so they create these books. Here we have, this is a book for holidays in Spanish and in Hebrew for people who are coming back and learning. And they export their Judaism, their style of Judaism, the style of their synagogues to the colonies that they were a part of. And so if you go to the Esnoga, the great Portuguese synagogue in Amsterdam, you'll see many of the same features that you'll find in the synagogue in Curacao, which is the Dutch colony, the columns, the placement of where the teva is, where the bima is, where the Aron HaKodesh is, the style of where the seat is placed, all the same style, same proportions, same sidurim, same prayer books. You see the columns here. This is the grand, incredible building here in Amsterdam. But if you go to the Caribbean, you'll also find those four symbolic columns. And another thing, which is just amazing about these communities, they weren't hiding. We talked about Mexico under the Inquisition. Jews had to hide everything. Everything was in secret. If they wanted to celebrate a holiday, they often would leave town. They'd go to the countryside where no one would see them. But the Jews in the Dutch colonies and the English colonies were prominent. They were part of the public scene. And if you look at this slide here, this is a postcard, a little map of the island of Curacao. And it tells you very clearly where the Jodekerk is, where the Jewish church is. And it's on the main street. It's not hidden. It's a prominent part, and they're proud of it. This is a book by the great Amsterdam rabbi Menashe ben Israel. It's called The Hope of Israel, Mikveh Israel, or in Spanish, Esperanza de Israel. He wrote this as a meditation on Messianism, on the discovery of the Americas. What does it all mean? On the encounter with the Native Americans. How does that fit with biblical prophecies? It's a fascinating work. He deals with all the latest theories of anthropology and history, and it's a work of an Amsterdam rabbi, here sketched by Rembrandt. Again, prominent, open, proud, and engaging with the world. He writes it in Spanish, not only for Spanish-speaking Jews, but Spanish was one of the great intellectual languages of the day. It was also translated to many other languages. Here you see the expansion of the community. This is in London. This is Bevis Marks, which still stands in London. Again, very similar architecture, evocative of the original one. any merchant traveling from Amsterdam to London would notice it, would feel comfortable there. This painting was done, just to give you a sense of the transatlantic nature of the community. This painting was done by a Jamaican-born Sephardic painter known as Mendes Belisario, one of the great national artists of Jamaica. He's revered in Jamaica. And so it's in London, but it's being painted by a Jamaican painter. And the community in Jamaica was bigger than the one in London, even though the London one obviously was very important. So that's kind of a change. Here in Brazil, many conversos came to Brazil when it was colonized by the Portuguese. But then there was about a 20, 30-year period in Recife where the Dutch took over a small part of Brazil and allowed religious freedom. So Protestants and Jews could live there openly. And many Portuguese conversos who were living there come back to Judaism. Not all, and often they do it tentatively. When this falls, many of those people stay in Brazil. They move out to the countryside, as people talked about last week. But something else happens. They need to go somewhere. Some of them go back to Holland. Some go to Suriname, which becomes a Dutch colony. Some go to Curacao. And some make it to a small, cold port called New Amsterdam, now known as New York. This was discovered in Recife. I've never seen it, so this is reported. They found a small mikveh in Recife. My friend Laura Lieben that I mentioned earlier, she went there. She believes this was a keli mikveh. It's too small for a person to go and immerse themselves. This is probably a mikveh for plates and things like that, which gives you a sense of the sort of level of concern that they had for Jewish practice. This was the first rabbi of Brazil. Okay, this is him as an older man, Isaac Aboab. He was one of the great Kabbalists of the 17th century, and he started his rabbinic career in Brazil, where he wrote a very powerful poem about their experience there. And here, this is a little stamp from modern Brazil commemorating it. And so throughout the Caribbean, you have these communities where synagogues exist, where there's schools, where Jews can be openly Jewish, but they're living right side by places like Cuba or Central America or South America, where Jews couldn't live openly, and where the only Jews that were there were secret Jews or people who knew they were Jewish. And this lasts until the Wars of Independence of the 1820s, when Spanish colonies throw off the Spanish. They depose the Inquisition. And around that time, you see the Sephardic Jews in places like Curacao and in the islands and Jamaica and in St. Thomas and other places, making their way for business reasons to places like Panama, there were new markets, or Venezuela, or other places, and often assimilating into the local population, no longer being Jewish 2 generations later. And you see it in the last names. You see it in people's, family histories in the places. It's just a picture of Suriname, but I think we're out of time. I want to leave time for questions. So I'll leave you with the image of Charleston. Again, the same sort of style. We can have a whole class on the architecture, which is something that fascinates me. But I'd love for you all to share your questions, and we have a few minutes left. Yeah. And also, I want to say, I gave an interview. That was my goal. There's a lot more to learn. I just showed you all those books, and the series will fill in many gaps, and there's much study to think about. So that's just a little bit, and I'm happy to take your questions.
Right. So one of the questions is, when did the Italian Jews arrive in Mexico City?
So those Italian Jews that I was mentioning, first of all, they were individuals. They were never coming in groups. It was 1 or 2 people, sometimes a father and a son. They were coming we have evidence of them coming in the 1580s, 1590s, into the early 1600s. Not much after that.
And I first should have said thank you very much. It was enlightening and really interesting. And I hope it excited other people to move to learn more as much as it did me. So, I mean, it's just, I always feel like there's always so much more to do,
I agree.
to
There
learn.
is. There is. There's no way around it.
So, question, what about the Sephardic Jews in New France? They're never mentioned. I
Oh.
never.
So, I mean, the open community in Quebec are, I think, my understanding, I don't know that much about that, but it dates to the American Revolution when loyalists, people who were loyal to England, left New York. There was a split at Sherith Israel in the Spanish Portuguese community of those who were for the revolution and those who were for staying with England. And though the loyalists, they ran to Montreal, and started a community there. I don't know about evidence of secret Jews coming to New France because the Jews, the conversos who made it to southern France, Bayonne and places like that, they were connected to Spain and Portugal, and then they were connected to the Caribbean. They did a lot of business with the Caribbean. Chocolate, for instance, was something that they were involved in. I know there was someone, I think, Laura, I think you interviewed someone, wrote a book about chocolate and
Yeah,
Bordeaux.
Mendez.
Yeah,
His
chocolate and
name?
Bordeaux, and like, so, there were these connections. Um, Jamaica also had several Portuguese Jews from France who moved back and forth. Um, so, but I don't think they were going. They weren't fur hunters. They weren't beaver hunters. They were more into. I think they had higher stakes involved.
And also
But
it's
that
cold.
I could be totally wrong. I don't know, but also like just to keep no, like the big communities were not in Charleston and New York and Philadelphia until the Civil War. They were in Jamaica, they were in Curacao,
Right.
Suriname, numbers wise, at least. I mean, it's not that they were nothing in the North, but it was a smaller group. Yeah.
Yeah, I do want to mention that those who have not don't know anything about the Suriname community, it is fascinating. I don't want to get into it now because I don't think we're going to end, but there are some amazing stories about the community
Yes.
in Suriname. So I encourage
Aviva,
that.
Aviva Ben-Or, you were interviewed Aviva, I think, right? Yes,
Yep.
Aviva Ben-Or has a new book on it, and there's other great stuff on it. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So I don't know how to exactly relate to this because people have been writing about Ladino and Greece and maybe just make a mention of why we weren't focusing on
Yeah,
Ladino in
yeah,
this.
yeah, yeah. So also, this is a great thing, and this is a really important thing about language. Um, the books that we saw that I showed you, those Sidurim are standard Spanish of the time.
Right.
The Jews who moved from Spain and Portugal to Amsterdam and London were their roots were in Spain and Portugal. Their roots were, and many of them, or at least their parents or grandparents, were educated in Catholic schools, often very good Catholic schools, in Spain and Portugal. And they were very familiar with the great authors of the time. They read Calderón de la Barca and Quixote and the Quixote and all the great Spanish authors. That was their Spanish. The Jews who leave Spain and Portugal in 1492 or shortly thereafter and make their way to the Eastern Mediterranean, to Ottoman Empire, to Turkey and Greece, and Israel, they take the language that they left with, the Spanish of the 15th century, they write it down in Hebrew characters. That's one of the hallmarks of it being Ladino, or Judaismo is another word for it, Jewish, like Yiddish. We all know someone who asks us if we speak Jewish, right? So Judaismo or Ladino. Ladino means that it's right. It's Latinate. They took that 15th century Spanish. They kept on speaking it, and it changed over time, and it absorbed Turkish words and Greek words and Arabic words and other things. And the Spanish, it evolved one way. Also, it was regional. There wasn't one Spanish. If Jews who left Catalonia spoke differently than the Jews who left from the south of Spain. So it's going to be different. And it develops into this this beautiful thing called Ladino that we call Ladino today. But that happened over hundreds of years, and a Spanish speaker and a Ladino speaker speaking can understand each other. There's like some funny differences, but the Jews in the West did not speak Ladino. Again, unless they happened to have left Turkey and they showed up someplace, but they spoke Spanish. That's what they spoke. That was the world that they kept in touch with. Like I said, we know that in Amsterdam there were literary clubs that would get together and read the latest plays in Spain, you know, for fun, because there's no TV, right? So instead of Netflix, you can read the latest coming out of Spain. They were reading and speaking. When Menachem Ben Israel writes, he writes like a Spanish, like a highly educated person of the day from Spain, not someone who's writing a Jewish language, and so. And there's not one Ladino either. Depends on the place. Someone from Greece is going to sound different than someone from Turkey, or there's Hakatia from North Africa, which is its own very beautiful, different sort of Jewish Spanish. Yeah.
Right. So just to reiterate, we're not focusing today on the Greek and Turkish Jews, although there is a beautiful history there, and they do come to America, but that's not who we're focusing on in this series. Please do follow us because I'm sure we will deal with them soon. And again, it's a beautiful history. But getting back to the Americas, when did the Jews arrive in Venezuela?
Great question. So the open Jews who come. Now, when I say open Jews, I mean someone who was not converted, someone who was born a Jew, lived like a Jew. The first time you start seeing that is after independence. So the 1830s, 1840s, we start to see Jews from Curacao in particular, because it's so close, right? It's very, very close geographically, coming and selling, doing business on the coast. Some of them settling in places like Coro, which is on the coast, and having a very tiny community. Edna Eisenberg, one of the great scholars of modern Latin American Jewry, a great scholar of Borges and many others. She's written about a poet who came out of that community from the late 19th century. I'm blanking on his name. He had one of these beautiful long Sephardic names. And he was this wild man poet. He drunk himself to death, basically. But he was part of that community, and his poetry is very interesting. And so, they even had a poet, but it was a very small community, very little left of it. But they start coming then, and that's when, sadly, the current and the previous dictator of Venezuela, both have very Jewish names, right? So, names that you would have found in Curacao. Doesn't mean that they are, it just means that they have those names. Names like Maduro is a very classic name. But anyways, so yeah, it starts then. But then the big wave, and this, I'll just say this could be another class, and it's a lot of fun, and I teach it in grad school. The arrival of Jews to modern Latin America, to post-independence Latin America, starts in earnest in the late part of the 19th century. The first big group to come are actually Moroccan Jews to the rubber area of Brazil and Iquitos in Ecuador, and in Manaus and Belém in Brazil, there is still a Moroccan community from that time period, and that was a very small, isolated event. And then you see it come in bigger numbers with the dissolution of the Ottoman Empire. So Jews from, not only Jews, Christians and Muslims also, leaving the instability of Syria, of Lebanon, of the land of Israel, of Egypt, of Turkey and Greece, start emigrating. Some of them come to North America, and a lot of them go to South America. If you're a Jew, you have an advantage, because if you're a Sephardic Jew, you speak Spanish, you speak Ladino, and you can make yourself understood when you show up. Arab, when it's amazing to me to think of like, a true Syrian Jew showing up or a true Syrian Christian showing up in Mexico and making themselves understood. How did they do that? But they did. Like all immigrants, can do magic sometimes. And um, and that comes in earnest after the First War. After First World War, you start seeing very large numbers of Sephardic Jews showing up, along with obviously Eastern European Jews. Eastern European Jews come to Argentina, for instance, in very large numbers after the first waves of pogroms in the 1880s, 1890s, often assisted by Baron de Hirsch, who bought land to set them up in Argentina. Great stuff. Jewish of the Pampas is a great collection of short stories. And so all those people that you may meet, or maybe you are one of them, Latin American Jews, 95% of them have their roots in the 20th century, after World War I, after 1924, when America passes a very draconian immigration law and doesn't allow immigration, especially from undesirable places like Eastern Europe and Southern Europe. Jews have no place to go in America. They start finding their way to Cuba, to Mexico, to Brazil, to any place that would let them in. And many of those countries were actually looking for Europeans, and they kind of gulped and said, "Okay, you're Jewish, we'll still take you." And so they benefit countries. Those communities date to 1924, and obviously with the war, with the show, it meant it became more difficult. Also a place where many people found refuge in a way that they couldn't in the United States because of our immigration policy. Yeah.
Can I ask one more question? I mean, there are more, but one more
Okay. Sure.
I don't know if you have the answer to this,
Yeah.
but if you can talk a little bit about the kashrut and circumcision and weddings and bar mitzvahs of the conversos in the New World.
Amazing. So this is great topic. Again, it's very individualistic. Some people were concerned, some people were less concerned. For some people, their practice was totally in the heart. They would pray in their heart. They believed in the law of Moses, that they were going to be saved by the one God and not by Jesus. And that was their religion. And other people, other people very careful with their having different thoughts between them and their servants. Shabbat not working or not traveling. But the biggest types of practices were more in things like fasting, which you could not, and circumcision was very rare.
Right.
Carvajal circumcised himself, his brother does. It's very rare. It's not because it's such a clear sign that
Right.
you get in big trouble if you do. So we have examples, but it's not a standardized, not regulated in the way that you would imagine it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for this two-part series. I hope
you.
to have you back soon. And I encourage everyone, I know we didn't answer all the questions. Please do send them to me, follow up. We'll either do it in a follow-up session or in our Q&A session. We're continuing. This isn't a, two-stop shop. We're going to continue. So please do
Wonderful.
continue to send them in, and thank you for joining us. You'll receive a follow-up email with most of the suggested books as well, and have a good evening.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank
you all.
you.
Be well. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.